Welcome, I'm Sam Faddis. This is Ground Truth, and today we're going to be talking about China, the virus, and lies. It never ceases to amaze me, really, how people actually pay attention to anything said by a communist regime. I mean, communist regimes don't stay in power because they tell the truth or enjoy the support of their people. They stay in power through oppression. Sometimes that's torture, imprisonment, execution. In many cases, it's through manipulation of reality. They simply prevent people from knowing the truth and substitute in its place a false narrative, something that leads to the support of the regime. We've seen that in the past with North Korea, which for many, many years prevented its people from knowing there'd been an American moon landing. We've seen it very recently in the case of communist China, which defaulted to simply lying and covering up as soon as the coronavirus began to erupt, which was really the end of last year. They simply decided that it didn't exist, and anybody who tried to tell the world that this problem existed was basically disappeared in one way or the other, including medical professionals who rang the alarm bell. Eventually, of course, the scope of the pandemic overcame those efforts. Even the Chinese weren't able to keep it covered up. The world found out, and basically the entire world now understands that for months the Chinese lied to us. Maybe there's a couple of Bernie bros somewhere who still believe that the Chinese were telling the truth, but everybody else understands exactly what the Communist Party of China did. And the price we all paid for it, because estimates are that up to 95% of the people who were going to die from this virus could have been saved if the Chinese had told us the truth from the outset. But here's the really strange part to me. There's this first wave of lies from China. Everybody basically admits that they were lies now. And now we have a completely second wave of lies from the Chinese, and yet many of the same people who were fooled the first time around are apparently being fooled again and are buying into these Chinese lies. The Chinese narrative now, of course, is they have vanquished the virus. New cases don't exist anymore. Everything's going back to normal. And by the way, we can all thank them for having shown us how to survive this thing. In their spare time, of course, the Chinese also suggest on alternate days that either the United States or Italy started the virus, but that's another matter. So let's look at the facts here for a minute with this Chinese narrative, or in regard to this Chinese narrative, because there's really a steady stream, almost a flood of information coming out of China that shows that this whole second wave of lies is, well, lies. To begin with, the centerpiece of this whole narrative from the Chinese is that the 15 temporary hospitals that they set up in Wuhan, not really hospitals, just places where you either die or recover on your own, but in any event, what they called hospitals, have all been dismantled. Everybody's been sent home. Nothing to see here. It's all good. Except, first of all, it's not clear they've all been dismantled. In fact, there were reports the other day that at least one new one has been built. But even if you just take the Chinese assertion on its face, what they're actually saying is they closed 15 locations and moved everybody from those locations, which they had called hospitals, to 30 other locations, which they call recovery centers. Not sure what the distinction is between hospital and recovery center in their mind. But in any event, we took everybody from 15 locations and spread them out to 30 new locations. They didn't go home, and it's not at all clear that they've recovered. We now see also that there are documents coming out. A number of news sources have reported on this, including the Epoch Times. Documents from inside Wuhan showing that, in fact, every day new cases are being diagnosed, and in fact, new buildings are being designated as quarantine sites, locked down, if you will, sealed with everybody inside of them. Then there's the usual sort of Chinese shell game going on here. If you try to check into a hospital and you say you have the coronavirus, in some cases you're just not admitted. They don't say you don't have the coronavirus, they just don't want you on the books as having the coronavirus. In other cases, if they admit you, they classify you as having something else. You're a pneumonia patient, definitely not a coronavirus patient. Or if push comes to shove, yes, you have the coronavirus, but the infection came from somewhere else. It's a foreign case. This is an example of how the rest of the world hasn't done the same kind of good job that the Chinese have. Also, some other very troubling things here. The Chinese made a big deal over the last week, 10 days, about sending medical personnel back to their home provinces. These were people that had been surged into Wuhan. But now we see that teams are being sent back to Wuhan from other provinces. In fact, one province alone had 453 doctors and nurses, this just a few days ago, ordered to return to Wuhan. Very hard to understand how that is necessary if there are no new cases and everything is under control. We would note also both Russia and North Korea, which share long land borders with China, have kept those borders sealed. So those guys don't seem to be impressed by the Chinese assertions that it's all under control either. Chinese, of course, recently threw out some of the last few Western journalists in China. There have been reports that they are purging electronic files down to the province level on anything to do with coronavirus, destroying all documentation. That all seems kind of strange. If you did such a good job and there's nothing to hide, you'd think you'd want to invite Western journalists in and let them go through the books to see what a magnificent job you've done instead of covering it all up. Here's another really troubling statistic that right now we probably don't know exactly what to do with. We have determined, the press has determined, that something like 21 million cell phone accounts were deleted from the Chinese cell phone system over the last 3 months. Now, just to make sure that that's clear, the significance is clear, China practices a very tight system of social control. And one of the ways it does that is by basically requiring you to use a QR code generated on your cell phone to pay for pretty much everything. Cash is generally not used. Credit cards aren't used. You have to use your cell phone. You have to carry it. And it has to be monitored at all times. This way the Chinese government knows where you are, what you're doing, what you're buying, who you're talking to. This is part of a system of control on the part of the Communist Party. So it's not like you can pick or choose whether you want to have a cell phone, get rid of your account, change carriers. Somehow 21 million such accounts have vanished in the last few months. Now, one explanation would obviously be that 21 million people just died. I think everybody finds that a little hard to believe, and yet it's still a completely unexplained phenomenon, and particularly troubling because the internet has been flooded for a long time with video coming out of China from cremation sites showing the piles, literally piles of cell phones from people who had died and been cremated, being shoveled up, swept up, and disposed of. We're talking cell phones by the thousands. Here's maybe the most troubling part of all of this. Back easy 2-3 decades ago, the Chinese Communist Party basically made a bargain with its people, essentially in exchange for an improved standard of living in a growing economy. The Chinese people would continue to tolerate the Communist Party. That wasn't an express bargain, but it was more or less understood. And the Communist Chinese Party certainly understood the bargain because they had just seen what happened to the Soviet Union. And they knew that if they didn't give their people something, they were going to go the same way the Soviet Union had gone. Right now, the Chinese economy is crashing and burning. It is collapsing. Chinese government is selling off bonds to desperately raise foreign currency and capital. It has no choice but to restart the economy. It has no choice but to put people back in factories and put them back to work, because if it doesn't, they're done. Because the people will take care of it themselves, and the days of the CCP will be numbered. So this narrative that the virus is controlled, that everything's returning to normal, and that everybody's going back to work, no matter how suicidal, is essentially one that the communists have no choice but to adopt. And you can imagine what is going to happen when they begin to herd literally hundreds of millions of people back into crowded dormitory conditions and back onto factory floors, and they don't, in fact, have control over this virus. What it's going to mean is that this second wave of lies is going to lead to a second wave of the virus, perhaps worse than the first. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time on Ground Truth.